Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janabalabha Giri Bharadari Yasoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjana Yasoda Nandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamunatira Banachari Yamunatira Banachari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jayom Vishnupad, Paramahamsa Paramajakacharyato, Tadasata Srimad. Fine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki. Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda Ki. Grantaraj, Srimad Bhagavatam Ki. Sambheda Bhakta Vrinda Ki. Gaur Premanandi. All glories to some devotees. All glories to some devotees. All glories to some devotees. All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. Gopal, can I get you to push my camera forward just a little bit? Like this? No, just bring the whole thing forward, scoot it forward. Yeah, more. A little bit more. Okay. Now if you could just turn it slightly. Wrong way, the other way. Yep, that's perfect. Great, thanks. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Ajnanatimidandasya Gananjana Shalakhaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Shtapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Didati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhunam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavan Eshvari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakopa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So if I understood correctly, we are on Canto 3, Chapter 13, Text 31, right, today? So this is a...
Oh, you're allergic, yes.
Yeah, I'm allergic to marigolds. I'll turn into a sniveling, viscous mess in a minute with mucus coming out of every pore of my nose and eye. Okay, right. I must have offended marigolds when I was in a past life or something like that, so they don't like me in this life. Okay, so here is our verse for today. Swadam srayo dhritya mahim nimagnam. Swadam srayo dhritya mahim nimagnam. Sa uttita samruruse surasaya. Sa uttita samruruche rasaya. Tatrapi daityam garaya patantam. Tatrapi daityam garaya patantam. Sunabha sandipita tivramanyu. Sunabha sandipita tivramanyu. Swadam shrayo dhritya mahim nimagnam. Sa uttita samruruse rasaya. Tatrapi daityam garaya patandam. Sunabha sandipita tivramanyu. Swadam Srayodhritya Mahim Nimagnam Sad Uthita Sumruruche Rasaya Tatrapi Daityam Garaya Patandam Sunabha Sandipita Tibramanyu Swadham Strayodhritya Mahim Nimagnam Sa Uthita Samruruche Rasaya Tatrapi Daityam Garaya Patantam Sunabha Sandipita Tibramanyu Swadam Srayodritya Mahim Nimagnam Sa Uthita Samruruche Rasaya Tatrapi Daityam Garaya Patandam Sunyabha Sandipita Tibramanyu. Ladies, anyone? I guess not. Swadam Strayam, by his own tusks. Udritya, raising. Mahim, the earth. Nimagnam, submerged. Saha, he. Uthita, getting up. Samruruche, appeared very splendid. Rasaya, from the water. Tatra, there. Api, also. Daityam, unto the demon. Gadaya, with the club. Apatantam, rushing towards him. Sunabha, the wheel of Krishna. Sandipita, glowing. Tibra, fierce. Manyuhu, anger. So the translation reads, Lord Boar very easily took the earth on his tusks, and he got it out of the water. Thus he appeared very splendid. Then, his anger glowing like the Sudarshana wheel, he immediately killed the demon Hiranyaksha, although he tried to fight with the Lord. So, responsively, Lord Boar very easily took the earth on his tusks and got it out of the water. Thus he appeared very splendid. Then his anger glowing like the Sudarshana wheel, he immediately killed the demon, Hiranyaksha, although he tried to fight with the Lord. So here is the purport. According to Srila Jiva Goswami, the Vedic literatures describe the incarnation of Lord Varaha, boar, in two different devastations, namely the Chakshusha devastation and the Swayambhuva devastation. This particular appearance of the boar incarnation actually took place in the Swayambhuva devastation, when all the planets, other than the higher ones, Jana, Mahar, and Satya, merged in the water of devastation. This particular incarnation of the boar was seen by the inhabitants of the planets mentioned above. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti suggests that the sage Maitreya amalgamated both the boar incarnations in different devastations and summarized them in his description to Vidura. Samdam Shrayodhritya Mahim Nimagnam Sautita Samruruche Rasaya Tatrapi Daityam Gadaya Patantam Sunabha Sandipita Tivramanyu. Lord Boar very easily took the earth on his tusks and got it out of the water. Thus he appeared very splendid. Then his anger growing like the Sudarshan wheel, he immediately killed the demon Hiranyaksha, although he tried to fight with the Lord. This chapter 13, gives kind of a summary of the story of Varahadev, and we see that two versions, the red one and the white one, the one in Swayambhuva Manu, that Varaha is the one that lifts the earth out of the waters, as our Pancharatna was mentioning yesterday. And then later in the Chakshusha Manu, he lifts the earth out of the water and fights with Hiranyaksha, I think, too. I'm not sure which of the two Varahas he fights with Hiranyaksha, but I believe it's the second one. There's a little bit more of backstory there that there was some fight between the demigods and Hiranyaksha, and Hiranyaksha became angry and threw the earth into the water. So in that particular pastime, that's how it got there. But of course, I think in the beginning, in Swayambhuva Manu's time, the earth is already there because of the fact that it just precedes the previous night of Brahma, where everything is submerged into the water. So from verses 1 through 17, our Burijan tells us that we hear about the eagerness of Swayambhuva Manu to serve. From 18 through 33, we hear about the glories and birth of Varahadev, which is where we are right now. And in a few verses, 34 through 45, we're going to hear further glorification of Varaha by the sages. And from 46 through 50, the end of the chapter, Varahadev winds up his pastimes and goes back. So that's kind of what it is. The sages were there. They came down from the heavenly planets. And we find that the sages were very appreciative of the boar, even though, generally speaking, a boar incarnation, not a very... in general, boars are not considered highly. And as will be mentioned later on, if a boar came into this room and was wet and started shaking itself and sprinkling water on us, we would all be disgusted and we would want to take bath afterwards. But the actual Supreme Personality of Godhead as a boar was sprinkling water on the sages, and they were purified by it, quite from being disgusted. They were purified by it, because whatever the Supreme Lord does is special. And even though he can appear as a boar, he doesn't have any of the nastiness associated with boars, because he's not a common boar. This is, one thing that's a little bit easy to understand. We can understand that the purpose of the spiritual world is the lila of the Supreme Lord. That's the whole purpose of it. It's like a giant stage or playground where the Lord carries out his various activities in various kinds of leelas in different places. As Lord Ramachandra, as Lord Krishna, as Lord Vishnu, as Lord Gauranga, he carries out various different leelas in the spiritual world. And generally, the material world is the place where the Lord gives us our chance to carry out, we can't really call them leelas, they're kind of like ignorant wanderings throughout the material domain. Brahmanda Brahmete Konya Bhagavan Ajiv. We are wandering throughout the material universe, hoping to find something that will attract us. But this is actually just a farce. However, the Supreme Lord does himself come to the material world and carry out pastimes as well. So the material world also is a stage for the Lord's pastimes. How else would he be able to fight with Hiranyaksha? There are no Hiranyakshas in the spiritual world. So he has to fight with the demon Hiranyaksha, and he does so here in this material world that we live in. And so it's interesting that the theme has come up several times in our hearing of this chapter of Srimad Bhagavatam, that these pastimes may seem strange to us. In fact, the fifth canto and the whole arrangement of the world that we don't see may sound strange, but it can easily be understood that the laws of physics, as we understand them in our modern day, are nothing more and nothing less than restrictions. They're placed upon the Supreme Lord, by the Supreme Lord, on the living entities who are incarcerated in this material world. So these are restrictions. The Supreme Lord does not have to abide by those restrictions. He created them and he placed them. So in the material world, things happen in a very particular way. And that's what the scientists study. The electromagnetic radiation goes through the air according to, Maxwell's laws. Various chemical elements come together according to either one kind of attraction or another, depending on their valence or their ionic situation. These things all happen in a very, very specific way. When we get into biology, it's such an intricate level of one thing upon another thing that it beggars the imagination of how it happens. And it has to happen in a very specific way. Like what I use often as an example is the blood clotting cascade. There's about somewhere between 12 and 20 steps in it, that something comes together with something else, activates something else, some more of something else is produced, some other things come into being, they touch one another, and it activates yet something else, and then various fibers begin to form, and it creates a stop in the flow of blood, and finally blood, corpuscles get caught in it, and in this way, when we get a puncture in our body, we don't bleed to death. But at the same time, if our blood clotted normally when it's inside our veins, we would immediately die too. So this very intricate system of turning the blood into a kind of meshwork of clotted, gelatinous kind of substance saves our lives. And it's enormously intricate. And this is the way things have to happen in the material world. One thing works on another thing, works on another thing. But the Supreme Lord doesn't have to follow all those steps. And that's what makes the material world how it comes to be. If we try to describe, as the material scientists do, everything comes from little building blocks that come together, then we find that we're stumped. How do these building blocks get where they are? How does this come together? But rather, the whole world comes from another world, the spiritual world, where things don't have to follow these rules. And even now, the Supreme Lord can turn off the rules if he wants to in specific times, and he turns them back on. And we have the whole world, a subtle phenomenon. But at any rate, the Supreme Lord can appear like a boar, he can appear like a lion, he can appear like a half lion, half man, he can appear like a fish, he can appear like a dwarf, he can appear like a brahmana, he can appear like anything that he wants to appear. Who's to tell him he can't? And he does it for variety's sake. And his energies can work in all kinds of mysterious and amazing ways. So we hear about in the Caitanya Bhagavatam this pastime of Lord Caitanya becoming a boar. So Lord Caitanya himself decided to become a boar. So it's really a kind of sweet little episode or narration that we find that Lord Caitanya, in his lila, this is when he was still a grihasta before he took sannyas and went to Jagannath Puri or traveled even to South India. So Lord Caitanya would, of course this was after he was initiated and actually became very focused in his ecstasies of various kinds. And he would, it says in the Caitanya Bhagavat that when Lord Caitanya would cry, he would cry and it seemed like he was producing the Ganges in water from his tears. When Lord Caitanya would laugh, he would laugh for 3 hours solidly. When Lord Caitanya would, roar, he would roar like a lion. It was immensely loud. When Lord Caitanya would talk to his devotees, he would grab them by the neck, and then he would talk to them. Sometimes Lord Caitanya would say things like, "Where is Advaitacharya? He called me and then he disappeared. Where is he gone now? Why did he call me?" He would say, sometimes in the mood of Akrura, that he would talk about, let's go to Mathura. There is a Dhanar Yagya going on there. We should see it, and we can take Krishna and Balaram there, and it will be very nice. Let's go there. Sometimes he would speak in separation from Krishna. Oh, where is Krishna? Where is Baba? And he would talk in this kind of way. And one day, he became very, very ecstatic, and he called out in great roars and went to Murari Gupta's house. So as he was going to Murari Gupta's house, he was roaring, "Shukra! Shukra!" which of course means boar. And when he got to Murari Gupta's house, he said, I am he, the one you worship. And he manifested cloven hooves from his hands and from his feet. And he became very big. And of course, Murari Gupta was frightened by this strange and dramatic form of Lord Caitanya, who he turned in now to a boar. And Lord Caitanya was manifesting in such an intense way that Murari Gupta began to offer various prayers in kind of fear. But also, he knew how to glorify the Supreme Lord. So it's kind of like we're hearing the sages glorifying the Supreme Lord after he appeared out of the nostril of Brahma. Very odd thing to do. Varahadev comes out of the nostril of Brahma. And then the sages come from the upper heavenly planets to offer various prayers. In this case, Lord Caitanya becomes the boar incarnation. And as the boar incarnation, he begins to terrify Murari Gupta. And Lord Caitanya, he tells Murari Gupta, he says, "My dear Murari Gupta, I love my devotees. I will do anything for my devotees. And if someone harms my devotees or is antagonistic to my devotees, I will kill them, even if that person happens to be my own son. Now, why would he say that? Because when Varahadev pulled the earth from the waters of devastation, when his tusk touched Bhumi Devi, the earth plane, Bhumi Devi became pregnant. And Bhumi Devi had a son, and that son was named Naraka. So Narakasura, of course, he wasn't a good son. So Narakasura, unfortunately, got association from Banasura. So because Narakasura became an associate of Banasura, he became very envious. And eventually, the Supreme Lord had to kill Narakasura. So this was an example of the Lord killing his own son if he became inimical to the devotees. So also, Lord Varahadev said, and there is that wretch Prakasananda who says that I have no hands or no feet. And he is teaching people these things. And he will meet with a terrible fate. He will get leprosy. So Lord Caitanya is describing how the impersonalists try to characterize the Supreme Lord as having no features, as having no form whatsoever. Now, we live in a time where practically everybody that believes in God at all is mostly believing in God as a non-personal essence or force or energy or something of the sort. So there are many, many people who think like this. Of course, not all of them are Mayavadis in the sense that they know about the form of the Lord and directly reject it. Many just are unaware that the Lord could have a form. That the fact that he has no form does not rule out the possibility that he could also have a form, that he could have both a form and no form. Therefore, we understand Lord Chaitanya taught Achintya Veda Veda Tattva. The Supreme Lord is form and not form at the same time. And the two together are achintya, or inconceivable. And we hear also in Srimad Bhagavatam that there is Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan features of the Lord. So the Paramatma feature is the all-pervading, non-personalized form of the Lord. And we have the Paramatma feature, which is the supersoul in the heart of all the living entities. And we also have the Bhagavan, or the personal form, in which he enjoys pastimes. And there are many different personal forms. So he has, as we've been discussing, these various forms. There is a song by Jayadev Goswami, which describes 10 particular important avatars of the Supreme Lord. So, but there are many more than 10. The Lord has countless avatars. And Lord Chaitanya began to mock the Vedas, which is strange. Lord Chaitanya was saying that the Vedas are too hard. They seem to give the notion that I have no form, but this is all false. So, Murari, do not trouble yourself by this kind of understanding. And then he gets more into talking about the impersonalists. So it's natural, and most people who are not devotees or never actually come in contact with Vaishnava philosophy would naturally come to the conclusion that God is some kind of non-personalized or all-pervading force. And In philosophical circles, this is known as the perennial philosophy. So if one does not come in contact with devotees, if one does not come in contact with Vedic literature, particularly described from the mouth of Vaishnavas, then one will more or less likely come to this conclusion, the conclusion that the Supreme is everywhere, spread throughout the universe. This is a natural conclusion. However, it is not the final conclusion. It is just one aspect of the Supreme Lord, and not a very important aspect of the Supreme Lord. And of course, this impersonal form of the Supreme Lord doesn't answer the question of why they're persons to begin with. If this is the highest thing, the non-personal form of the Lord, then why are there persons at all? Why was there ever any persons at any time in either a spiritual sense or in a material sense? Why have persons? If it's the highest thing, then just stay that way. But of course, we see that that's not the world we experience today. We see many persons, and we don't see the Supreme Person. So we may question if there is a Supreme Person. But actually, the Vedas explain that we are also eternal. We are co-eternal with the Supreme. However, we are destined to serve the Supreme, and we are happy when we do that. And if we don't do that, we can engage in our own quote-unquote lilas, our own quote-unquote pastimes in this material plane. But we will never be satisfied. We will never be happy. So we need to take up what Bhakti Vasudev Swami one time called sonic philosophy. So we are followers of a sonic religion and a sonic philosophy, which means that by sound we will be delivered. So by doing our best to try to hear the holy name, whether it's Krishna or even Varaha or Sukara, if we hear any name of the Supreme Lord, if we hear the pastimes of the Supreme Lord, Krishna and Balaram or Ramachandra. Murari Gupta was a great devotee of Lord Ramachandra. And so Lord Caitanya wanted to console him, make him feel happy. So we can think about or chant the names of any manifestation of the Supreme Lord, and it will purify us. So this is the amazing medicine. Who would have thought it, that by chanting the name of God, or alternatively by hearing about the pastimes of God, we can be delivered from all of our selfishness, all of our past bad karma. So we wander around, even as devotees, and we find it, we have to kind of muscle ourselves into keeping track of Krishna, into keeping Krishna in the center from moment to moment. But somewhere within each of us, there is that shining true self that not only does not have to force the focus on Krishna, but that self that we are is helplessly attracted to Krishna, as Lord Chaitanya was. Just by hearing about the boar, Lord Chaitanya became a boar. Just by hearing about a devotee, the Lord became overwhelmed with feelings for that devotee. Whatever it was, the Lord was immediately emotionally connected. How could Lord Chaitanya not think about Krishna? He was thinking about Krishna. It was spontaneous. So we hear that this is the final or the mature progression. And we can all get there eventually through performing Krishna consciousness. If we make an effort to think of why we're doing it, how we're doing it, and try to actually fine-tune it, we will get there faster. And Krishna will reveal it. Tesham satata yuktanam bhajatam pritipurvakam dadami buddhi yogam tam yena mamupayanti te. To those who are constantly devoted and worship me with love, I give the understanding by which they can come to me. And also the next verse, Tesham evanu kumpartam aham agyanajam tamaha na sayami atma bhavaso gyanadipenya bhasvata. Out of compassion for them, I, dwelling in their hearts, destroy with the shining lamp of knowledge the darkness born of ignorance. So these are the claims made by Krishna in Bhagavad Gita. And these can certainly come to pass. So we just have to make an effort to embrace this sonic philosophy and to not become at all bewildered by the Mayavad or the impersonal conclusion, which is everywhere. Most people, as I'm saying, if they believe in God at all, they believe in a non-personal God. And we live in such a time. We live in such an atmosphere. So it came down from an early, early time. I have something else I could go into, but I want to stop at this point, 15 till, so I can ask if there are any questions or comments. And we'll let the devotees get out the little microphone. And I'll drink some water while we're waiting for it to arrive. Oop, nothing in that bottle. No, I have another bottle.
Well, one thing I was just appreciating, Mahraj, is how, just the importance of hearing from senior devotees and more advanced devotees, because I feel like you have the conception of Krishna so strongly in your mind that you're able to kind of just translate onto that. So right now I'm thinking there's like no
beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
I'm thinking there's no doubt in my mind that Krishna's real, Krishna's a person, just by hearing from you. So I appreciate your association and hearing from you.
It's interesting, actually, that if we study Western philosophy, that what are the big questions that come up? What's really interesting and very annoying is how modern philosophers in our academic system ignore the obvious, borrowing of the Greek culture from the Vedic system. It's just there in every way. In general, the Greeks worshiped the demigods. Where does that come from? It's there in India. They had the earth, water, fire, and air. For some reason, they didn't like ether, but they had that part. They had an understanding, and they wrangled about whether things are one or not one, which is, if you read the Caitanya Charitamrita, we find that Shankara tried to put forth the idea of Vivartavad instead of Parinamavad. So Vivartavad means that if anything changes at all, it's illusion. So the one can only be unchangeable, white everything. That was his. And if it changed from that, it must be illusion. Therefore, the whole material world is illusion. And that's why they say that Brahmam Satya Jagan Mitya. And they wondered whether things would go on forever or not, and whether there was anything that was permanent, which is, in Bhagavad Gita we find out that the sages say that of the existent there is no cessation, of the non-existent there is no endurance. So this was the answer. Of course, the Greeks didn't know that answer. They speculated about it, that they thought that, well, maybe everything is changing. There was one pre-Socratic Heraclitus who felt that nothing remains the same. That his famous dictum was, you can't step in the same river twice. Moreover, not only can you not step in the same river twice, but it's not even the same you that would step in the same river. That everything's changing, just like a fire. It has these dancing tongues. And it's there in the sense of a fire, but nothing about it is the same. It's always changing. So he thought everything was fire. This was one of the other issues that the Greeks had. What does everything come from? Heraclitus thought it was fire. Others thought it was water. Some thought it was the Apeiron, some kind of mystical substance that was beyond that. Was there just one substance? So then you had Parmenides on the other side, who was preaching that nothing changes. Everything is exactly the same, that all change is illusion. So our senses are lying to us, that everything is, the one and the unchangeable, which is, straight philosophy from Sankaracharya, basically, that things can't change. And because they can't change, therefore, change is an illusion, the material world is an illusion. He comes to the exact same conclusion, on a basic sense. And he was completely diametrically opposed to Heraclitus. So you had these two opposing views, Both of them were monists. They all thought that it was all one it was coming from. But one of them thought that change was an illusion, and the others thought that everything is change and nothing stays the same. So these kinds of philosophical wranglings were impossible to reconcile unless you actually come in contact with Vaishnava philosophy, where we understand that it's one and it's different. There is the absolute truth, which never changes. There's the relative truth, which does change. All these things are nicely sorted out, So where would we be without, Achintya Bheda Bheda Tattva, with understanding Parinamavad instead of Vivartavad, and that all this could be solved, because the real problem is not that we don't have the right philosophy. The real problem is that we are not pure. Of course, the right philosophy will get us to where we can become purified, but we need to become purified, and that can only happen by service and by sonic philosophy, by chanting the holy name. So that can deliver us. We are, we have an easy rope that pulls us out of this material world. And we understand that it is a material world, that there's something beyond it, and that there is a spiritual world, and the Supreme Lord lives there. The reason that most modern academicians really worship the Greeks and think that they're something is because they feel that the Greeks were the first people to rule out the supernatural and believe only in natural causes. So that's why especially atheists and especially modern thinkers rule out the supernatural. There's no supernatural world. There's no God. There's no world of the demigods even. There's no subtle world. There's no karma. All these things don't exist. What exists is the world we see around us. But then the question becomes, is that world we see around us what we think it is? Now, if you study Western philosophy, you see that most of the time Western philosophers weren't clear. And it's quite obvious our senses lie to us, that not only we as devotees know that, but even most philosophers understand that the senses lie to us. There's optical illusions. Is the world that we see the same world that, if I see it, do you see exactly the same world I see? In some ways we can say generally yes, but in some ways it's no. If you take two witnesses to a crime, both of those witnesses will give somewhat of a different testimony. So what did they see, And we know that in general, we have a sense that there is an object like a table or a bottle. But is that thing actually a thing? It's changing. Our bodies are changing. As, Heraclitus put it, that it's like a bathtub with water being poured in on one side and the bath drain is open. So as water is coming in, it's flowing out. Or the river, you look at a river, but what is a river? Every second the water is changing. Every second, even underneath the bank, the bottom of the riverbed, that's also changing. We call it a thing, like the East River over there. And when you look at it from the Manhattan Bridge or the Brooklyn Bridge, it looks the same for the most part. But there's nothing about it that's the same. It's constantly new water is flowing from up the way there, and old water is going out towards the ocean, So it's only a process. It's only happening. And in such a way, atom by atom, second by second, everything that's around us, our bodies, the objects we live in, the city we're living in, the situation we're in is changing iota by iota. And yet we call it, we give it names, et cetera, et cetera. We know the soul is not doing that, but the body is. Material energy is. So there are things that never change, and there are things that change. And with the philosophy of Achintya Bheda Bheda Tattva, we can sort these things out. We can understand that there is something that doesn't change, and there's something that does change. And for that matter, the Pythagoreans were kind of on the trail, And what's really kind of comical is if you read about the Pythagoreans, they were of course into mathematics, which influenced later Greek thinkers. But at the same time, they believed in a world besides the material world. They believed that people, when they left this body, were reincarnated as sometimes other humans or maybe as animals. The Pythagoreans believed that one had to purify oneself to understand the other world, that one could not simply just do it by some kind of rhetoric. They had initiation ceremonies. It was called a mystic cult, so they had some kind of initiations they would do. They didn't eat meat. You read about these things and you wonder, gosh, this sounds really familiar to me, Of course, they believed they were kind of like, I think, the Bolas or the Olas or something. They had some kind of funny romantic practices that they did. But at any rate, you have this whole idea that there are many things there that are obviously, cribbed from Vedic philosophy. And so the Vedic philosophy was much more widespread than anybody realized. And if we can give up our love for the laws and instead turn to the lawmaker, then, we can actually make some real progress. Because that's the only real difference between mindless, material, atheistic science and the devotees. We believe in the lawmaker, they believe in the laws. So for them, E equals MC squared, F equals MA, P equals IE, all these different equations that are there. For them, those are the bottom line. And even God, if he exists, has to follow those laws, But for us, it's the lawmaker. He makes the laws. And those laws are his. He can change them. He can bypass them. And he makes them what they are. He's not held accountable to them because he's outside them. And even devotees who are dear to the Lord, to some extent, do not have to worry about those laws because the spiritual world is not constructed by the laws of physics as we know them. So one group believes ultimately in the laws, and the other group believes in the lawgiver. All right, you have a question or no? Okay, any questions or comments? All right, so thank you all very much. It's my honor and pleasure to be able to say a few things. I hope that something I've said helps to make Christian consciousness a little more solid, a little more clear. We'll let you all go for prasadam. All glories to Srimad Bhagavatam. All glories to the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord. All glories to Sri Sri Radha Govinda Dev. All glories to the boar incarnation, the fantastic boar incarnation of the Supreme. Hare Krishna.
His Holiness Chandrasekhar Mahraj ki.